Hey guys, my name is Vishal and I've had the XPS 13 for a little while now and I've been testing it out to see how well it performs. Today I'm going to be trying to answer the question of if you can use the XPS 13 for gaming, and if so, what games do I recommend playing on it. Now overall, the XPS 13 is not a gaming laptop. It's an ultrabook that caters more towards professional and home use. Now, don't get me wrong, the XPS 13 is a fantastic laptop when it comes to these activities, but because it doesn't have a dedicated graphics card or the necessary cooling hardware, it's not going to be a AAA gaming machine. The XPS 13 model that I have here includes a 4-core 11th gen i7 processor. It has onboard Intel Iris Xe graphics. It has 16 gigabytes of LPDDR4 memory, as well as a 512 gigabyte SSD. This is the newest version of the XPS 13 that you can get right now, and it comes in at around $2,000. Now, I know that there are many other laptops out there at this price range that are much better for gaming, but that's not the point of today's video. Now, I want to show you guys that if you do decide to go with the XPS 13, what you can expect from it in terms of the gaming experience. Now, I used the XPS 13 to play 6 games, some that I knew it could run fairly easily, like Minecraft, and others where I thought it might struggle a little bit, like Destiny 2. Now, in this video, I'm going to summarize my findings after having used the XPS 13 to play these 6 games that you can see on your screen right now. Now, the gaming experience overall was pretty decent considering that we're trying to play these games on an XPS 13. I was able to load up and play almost all the games that I tried, and most games were playable on their recommended settings. But I did notice a few issues. Number one was frame rates. Now in general, the main difference between the 6 games that I tested was that the higher end games tended to have lower performance and thus lower frame rates than the lower end games, which had higher performance, thus higher frame rates. Now, this isn't a surprise and it's to be expected, and I expected this when I started my testing. The one other thing that did affect frame rates was whether the XPS 13 was plugged in or not. I generally saw slightly better performance when the XPS 13 was plugged in versus when it was not for a particular game. The second issue was something that I wasn't expecting, and that is that Forza Horizon 5 just refused to run on the XPS 13. I managed to get it to kind of run, and it was super choppy and it looked like the screen was like tearing, so I just immediately turned that off right away. But it turns out that you absolutely need a dedicated graphics card to run Forza Horizon 5, which is a bummer. The last thing that I noticed was just how hot the XPS 13 got while playing games, especially the higher end games. You could actually feel the keys heating up while you played these games, and if you had to pick up the XPS 13 for whatever reason, the bottom aluminum cover would be uncomfortably hot. Another good indication of the heat was just how loud the fans got when you were playing these games. Now, I'll talk about CPU temperature shortly, but I was kind of concerned about the health of the XPS 13 if I continued to play these games for an extended period of time. Alright, let's take a little bit of a closer look at each of the games that I tested on the XPS 13. The first game that I tested was Minecraft. This is probably one of the most popular games that you can play, and is something that you can run on pretty much any device because of how accessible it is. And what I found on the XPS 13 was pretty interesting. Minecraft actually set the highest settings as its recommended settings for the XPS 13, but it set the render distance to 12 chunks. Now at these settings I was able to get over 100 FPS, but when I increased the render distance from 12 chunks to 32 chunks, it decreased the performance drastically down to about 20 FPS. Now, do I think that you need to run Minecraft at 32 chunks render distance? Well, probably not, and you can get away with the 12 chunk render distance very comfortably, with the added benefit that you'll be at 100 FPS. The second game that I looked at was Rocket League. Now, this is another one of those fairly popular games that you can run on pretty much any device. On Rocket League, I was again recommended the highest settings, and the XPS 13 was able to run it at about 50 FPS, both unplugged and plugged in. Now, one interesting thing that I found was that the XPS 13 actually limited the performance of Rocket League when it wasn't plugged in to about 60 FPS on the lowest settings. When I did plug the XPS 13 in, this performance jumped from 60 FPS all the way to 100 FPS. Moving down the list, we have Fortnite. Now, I was kind of surprised by how resource intensive Fortnite was, and I thought I'd have better performance than I did. At the lowest setting, I was only able to get around 40 FPS, and I needed to be plugged in to get closer to 60 FPS. Now on top of that, the settings that Fortnite recommended were even worse, allowing for only around 20 FPS, which is almost unplayable for a competitive shooter. Game number 4 was Guild Wars 2. I wanted to sneak in an MMORPG because people do play them and some have been out for almost 10 years, which means the requirements to run them aren't very high. Now Guild Wars 2 falls right into this category and has a good range of very low settings for low-end machines to extremely high graphics that struggle to run on the best of today's machines. Now, because MMOs are less about quick reaction times, the playable FPS requirements aren't as high as games like Fortnite. You can probably play them at around 30 FPS, and for the most part I was able to get between 20 to 30 FPS on the recommended settings for Guild Wars 2. It's not great, but playable in some areas with up to 50 FPS at the lowest settings and around 15 FPS at the highest settings. The last game I tested was Destiny 2. This is another popular AAA title that's fairly resource intensive, but is a few years old now. I didn't have very high hopes for this one being a AAA title, but I was honestly surprised on how well the XPS 13 handled it. In both the lowest and recommended settings, I was able to get between 20 to 25 FPS, which is probably unplayable in the Crucible, which is Destiny's PvP mode, but it's okay during regular gameplay. The highest settings were pretty much unplayable, especially with the laptop unplugged, but overall not terrible and better than expected for a AAA title. Alright, so after all of that, do I recommend getting the XPS 13 for gaming? Well, I think based on the testing you guys know my answer, but let me summarize it. Should you get the XPS 13 if you're looking for a gaming laptop? No. I think that the XPS 13 is a fantastic laptop, but it is an ultrabook or a workbook and is meant more for professional use rather than gaming. For this price point, you can get a much better gaming laptop or even build out a fully fledged PC, a fully fledged desktop at around the same price point as this, which would be much better for gaming. And that leads to the second question, which is, can you play games on the XPS 13? Well, yes, you can. Like I showed in this video, you can absolutely play games on the XPS 13. Now, what games do I recommend playing on it? Well, I would recommend games like Minecraft or Rocket League, which are fairly easy to run. I would absolutely not recommend games like Fortnite or other AAA titles on the XPS 13 because the laptop can get very hot, and I'd be actually worried about its longevity if you were to play those for an extended period of time. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. If you guys learned something about the XPS 13 or are planning to get it, let me know down in the comments section below. If you guys liked today's video, hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.